This is the moment the entire support system around Donald Trump did not just crack, it shattered. If you were watching Washington on the morning of Tuesday, April 15, 2026, at 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time, you would have seen something that has never happened before in modern American political history. The lights in the West Wing were on. Aides were moving through the hallways faster than usual. Phones were ringing. And outside on the lawn, 3 senior Republican senators who had flown in the night before were standing in the cold, not asking for a meeting. They were leaving one. That image tells you everything. Donald Trump, already drowning in a war that has no coalition, a blockade that is not working, an economy bleeding through rising prices, and a base that is fracturing in real time, has just been abandoned by the one group that was supposed to be his final wall, his own party, his own senators, his own movement. In this breakdown, we are going to show you exactly how this happened, why it happened at the same time across every front, who made the decision to walk, how markets responded within hours, and why what you are watching right now is not a stumble. It is a structural collapse that was always going to end here. Trump is not just losing support. He is losing the architecture that made him possible. 3 years ago, Donald Trump made a promise that his supporters believed completely. He said he would come back stronger. He said the second term would be different. He said he had learned from the mistakes of the first. He said he would surround himself with loyal people, move fast, and deliver results so decisive that even his enemies would have to admit it was working. The plan was to use executive power so aggressively, so rapidly, that opposition would not have time to organize. The idea was to hit on tariffs, hit on immigration, hit on foreign policy, and hit on domestic spending all at once. Overwhelm the system, move faster than the media cycle. Never let the opposition breathe. But the cost of that plan was never just political, it was structural. It meant burning relationships that took decades to build. It meant treating allies like leverage. It meant treating institutions like obstacles. And it meant treating loyalty as a one-way street where everyone was expected to give it and no one was expected to receive it. Sources close to the Republican Senate caucus say that by February of this year, serious private conversations were already happening about what happens if the war with Iran drags past summer. 3 senators, according to people briefed on those conversations, told leadership privately that they could not survive a re-election campaign defending both rising grocery prices and an unpopular conflict at the same time. Trump gambled that the loyalty he demanded would hold under any pressure. He assumed that fear of being attacked on social media would keep his own people in line. He assumed wrong, because there is a point at which the fear of the president becomes smaller than the fear of losing your seat. And that point arrived this week. At 9:15 a.m. on Tuesday, April 15, 2026, the first public signal arrived. It did not come from a Democrat. It did not come from the media. It came from Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, one of the most reliably pro-Trump voices in the entire Senate. He released a 1-paragraph statement. No press conference, no phone call to the White House first, according to 2 people familiar with the situation. The statement said he had serious concerns about the direction of the Iran negotiations and that the American people deserved a clear accounting of what was being promised and to whom. For 30 seconds after that statement dropped, there was silence across every Republican communications channel. Then the phone started. While Senator Cotton's statement was being processed inside the White House, something else was happening at the same moment across the Atlantic. The foreign ministers of Germany, France, and the United Kingdom were holding a joint press conference in Brussels where they formally announced a security coordination framework that did not include the United States. They did not attack America. They did not mention Trump by name. They simply announced a new structure and moved on. That silence, that deliberate absence of America from the frame, was louder than any criticism. And while that press conference was happening in Brussels, markets in New York opened and immediately moved. The Dow dropped 487 points in the first 11 minutes of trading. The yield on 10-year Treasury bonds jumped. Oil futures rose 3.2% on fears that the Hormuz situation was further from resolution than the administration had been saying publicly. Traders were not reacting to a tweet. They were reacting to the recognition that the people around Trump were no longer willing to absorb the cost of standing next to him. Pause. That is the thing the markets understood before the cameras did. When allies leave, the risk premium on everything goes up. By noon on Tuesday, 4 more Republican members of the House had issued statements ranging from concern to outright criticism. By 3 p.m., a senior Republican donor, someone who had written checks totaling over $12 million to Trump-aligned organizations since 2020, went on record with the Wall Street Journal saying he was pausing all future commitments until there was a clear and stable strategy on the conflict. This was not a bad day. This was a coordinated departure, and it happened across 5 separate fronts at exactly the same time. According to sources with direct knowledge of internal Republican Senate discussions, a private call took place on the evening of Monday, April 14th, the night before the public statements began. The participants included the Senate Majority Leader, 3 committee chairs, and 2 of the most senior Republican strategists in Washington. The topic, according to one person who was briefed on the call afterward, was blunt. The question on the table was not whether Trump's poll numbers were slipping. Everyone already knew they were slipping. The question was whether the party could afford to be seen as the reason nothing was changing. One senator on the call reportedly said that his internal polling in a state Trump won by 14 points showed his personal approval had fallen to 41%. Another said donors in his state had stopped returning calls from party fundraisers. A third said that the local Republican Party chairs in 3 of his largest counties had privately told him they were worried about volunteer turnout for the midterms. The decision made on that call, according to the person briefed on it, was methodical. It was a cold political calculation. They were not abandoning Trump out of principle. They were distancing themselves out of survival. The message passed through channels was simple. Senators would begin issuing measured statements of concern, not attacks, not demands for resignation, just enough distance to give themselves room to run their own races. And then something happened that no one planned for. As the call was ending and participants were signing off, a hot microphone on one end of the line picked up a voice, later identified as belonging to a senior Senate aide, saying quietly to someone in the room, "He is not going to recover from this one. This is different." And then the line went dead. That exchange, which leaked to 2 journalists by Tuesday evening, crystallized what everyone in the building already sensed. The people closest to power had stopped believing in the recovery. Why did this happen all at once? Follow the incentives. Donald Trump was built by a coalition. That coalition had 3 pillars. The first pillar was the donor class, people who wanted tax policy, deregulation, and a business-friendly environment. The second pillar was the ideological base, people who wanted border security, cultural conservatism, and a rejection of what they saw as elite capture of American institutions. The third pillar was the elected officials who needed his endorsement to survive primaries and his base to win general elections. For most of the first year of the second term, those 3 pillars held because each one was getting something. Donors got deregulation. The base got tough talk on immigration and trade. Elected officials got the president's endorsement and his crowd. The system worked as long as everyone was getting paid. The Iran war broke the payment system. Donors are now looking at an economy where inflation is back at 3.4%, where the IMF has cut U.S. growth forecasts by 0.8 points for 2026, and where the uncertainty premium is making long-term investment planning nearly impossible. They are not getting paid anymore. They are absorbing cost. The ideological base is fracturing because the war does not fit the worldview. Trump built his movement on the idea that America was being drained by foreign entanglements, that other countries were taking advantage, that the solution was to pull back and put America first. A war with Iran, with no coalition, no clear objective, and no exit timeline is the exact opposite of that vision. Sources inside several major conservative media organizations say internal audience data shows engagement dropping sharply on pro-war content, while anti-intervention content is performing at record levels. And elected officials are simply doing math. With midterms 14 months away and a president whose national approval rating has fallen to 38%, according to 3 separate polls released this week, the calculation has shifted. The risk of being close to Trump now outweighs the risk of creating distance. This is not 5 separate decisions. This is one decision made by three different groups at the same moment, because the conditions that made loyalty rational had collapsed simultaneously. Historians will call this the accountability convergence. It is the moment when the political, financial, and ideological costs of supporting one person all cross the threshold of tolerance at the same time. It happened to Lyndon Johnson in 1968. It happened to Richard Nixon in 1974. And it is happening now, faster than either of those, because the information environment moves faster and the fractures were deeper from the start. Here is the domino effect as it stands right now. If Republican senators continue distancing themselves through May, Trump loses the ability to pass any major legislation in the final 2 years of his term. If he cannot pass legislation, the only tool he has left is executive action. If he relies entirely on executive action, every major policy decision becomes a court battle. If every major policy decision becomes a court battle, the administration is effectively frozen. And if the administration is frozen during an active military conflict, the consequences reach beyond politics into genuine national security risk. Beijing is watching this carefully. Analysts at three major foreign policy institutions say Chinese state media has been tracking the Republican Senate statements with unusual intensity this week. What they see is not a scandal. What they see is an opportunity. A president who cannot count on his own party cannot credibly threaten consequences. A president who cannot credibly threaten consequences loses deterrence. And a president who loses deterrence invites pressure from every direction at the same time. Meanwhile, ask yourself, where is the vice president? Where is the Secretary of State? Neither has appeared at a public event to defend the administration's position on Iran in the last 72 hours. Their silence is not an accident. It is positioning. They are protecting their own futures by making sure their fingerprints are not too deep on whatever comes next. The Republican coalition is now visibly splitting into two camps. On one side are the Trump loyalists, mostly in safe red districts, who believe doubling down is the only option. On the other side are the institutionalists, the senators and governors with statewide constituencies who need independent voters and who can see the November numbers already forming in their heads. A party divided between those two camps cannot run a coherent national campaign. It cannot raise unified money. It cannot deliver a consistent message. And it cannot protect a president when prosecutors, regulators, and oversight committees begin their work in an environment where the political shield has been lowered. Reports from people close to the inner circle describe a president who is spending more time on social media than in briefings, who is asking the same question to different aides on the same day, that question being why the coverage is so unfair when the economy was so good just 18 months ago. Who is calling former allies in the middle of the night and finding that the calls are being sent to voicemail? The isolation is not just political, it is personal. And personal isolation at the level of the presidency does not produce better decisions. It produces faster ones, and faster decisions made alone, without counsel, without correction, without anyone willing to say the hard thing, are the most dangerous kind. The empty chair is not just a piece of furniture. Every time a senator who once stood beside Donald Trump now chooses to hold a press conference without mentioning his name, that empty chair is the symbol. It represents something that power cannot buy back once it is gone. It represents the moment when the people who built the stage decided the show was over. Trump wanted to be the president who remade American power. He wanted tariffs that would bring manufacturing home. He wanted a military posture so decisive that no adversary would test it. He wanted a political coalition so loyal that no challenge from inside or outside the party could threaten it. He ended up with a war that has no exit, an economy that is pricing out the exact voters who put him in office, and a party that is quietly, methodically, without drama or declaration, stepping away from the building before it comes down. You can control a narrative. You cannot control an interest rate. You can dominate a news cycle. You cannot dominate a quarterly earnings report. You can attack a senator on social media at midnight. You cannot stop that senator from looking at his own polling in the morning and making a decision that has nothing to do with you. Reality does not negotiate. Reality does not wait for a better moment. Reality simply accumulates until the weight of it becomes impossible to carry, and then the structure gives way all at once. So where does this stand right now today on April 16, 2026? The Senate Republican caucus is no longer operating as a unified body behind this president. That has not happened in public yet, but it has already happened in private, and what happens in private always finds its way out. 3 major donors have paused commitments publicly, and sources say at least 6 more are having the same conversation internally. Markets have priced in an extended period of policy uncertainty, which is the financial world's way of saying they do not trust the next move. And foreign governments, allies and adversaries both, are recalibrating their strategies around the assumption that this administration will be less coherent, less credible, and less capable of delivering on any promise it makes from this point forward. As we move toward summer, expect the social media output to increase as the real-world leverage decreases. Expect the attacks to get more personal and more erratic as the walls close in. Expect attempts to change the subject, to find a new enemy, to create a new crisis that resets the narrative. And expect those attempts to work less and less each time, because the audience that once amplified them is exhausted, because the officials who once defended them are protecting themselves, and because the institutions that once absorbed the pressure are pushing back. The foundation was always thinner than it looked. The loyalty was always more conditional than it was performed. The moment was always going to come when the cost of staying exceeded the cost of leaving. And when that moment comes for enough people at the same time, they do not announce it. They do not organize it. They simply walk, one after another, quietly, without a press release. And that is exactly what you watch this week. Subscribe and stay close to this story. We will be monitoring the Senate posture, the donor signals, and the foreign policy fallout in real time. If a major Republican breaks publicly and on camera in the next 10 days, we will be live within the hour. This is not background noise. This is the story of our moment. Watch closely. The chair is already empty. The question now is who notices first.